name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Come, Holy Spirit. From that time, Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the ancients and scribes and chief priests, and be put to death, and the third day rise again. And Peter, taking him, began to rebuke him, saying, Lord, be it far from me, thee, this shall not be unto you. Who turning said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan, you are a scandal to me, because you savor not the things that are of God, but the things that are of men. Good and gracious God, as we come here to reflect upon the writings of St. Francis de Sales, we ask that you would send your Holy Spirit to help us to recognize those things that we're being invited to savor. We would have right judgment, that we would have your counsel, and trusting this effort to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and on this feast day of St. Joseph, solemnity of St. Joseph, we say, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay. I want everyone to take like 30 seconds here and think of one thing that you do each day, any kind of practice that you've chosen to do, and it happens each day, so on a very regular basis, and it's almost automatic. It's almost like second nature. You hardly have to think about it. Just take a moment to think about it, consider that. Some you do ordinarily every day. Okay, can we get some volunteers here to share out? So be specific in regards to this activity.
This is not just spiritual.
Could be anything.
Brush my teeth.
Brush your teeth, okay?
Say my night prayers.
Okay.
Drink coffee.
Gaze out the window.
What's that?
Gaze out of the window.
Okay, gaze out the window.
Have dinner.
Have dinner. Okay. Let your dog out.
Yes. Talk to my dog.
Yeah.
When do you do that?
All the time. All the time. In response, he's yelling at me.
Okay. The reason I asked you to do this is because this whole section has to do with virtue. And when St. Francis de Sales is talking about virtue, he's really talking about very particular, specific, visible actions, okay, that are done habitually. So we usually think about virtue in a much more distant way, like in an abstract way, like a concept. So like the virtue of temperance is regulating those emotions that are moving towards pleasure. Okay, great. How does that look? What does that look like? You know what I'm saying? So it's like there's this general knowledge of what a thing is, but like it has to look like something. This is what, when we talk about virtue, and I think we need to highlight this is because this is not the way we've been formed and shaped in our considerations around virtue. We think about virtue in a much more abstract versus concrete way, right? That he's so, he has so much fortitude, and so it's like that's a generalization. It's a generalizing, right? So it's an overall, but like when I saw his son at Mass in the pew, basically not responding to any of his the dad's corrections, and I saw like how I felt irritated, and he kept being patient with him. So the fortitude would be exercised, and it's like it was a difficult good to achieve. That's what fortitude is about. So being patient with a son who's misbehaving, or a child that's misbehaving. So this, what St. Francis would say is like, the virtue here is not fortitude. He would say that this man's patient with his son Jonathan while at church. You see like how specific he gets? This is very enlightening. Virtue as particular, specific, concrete, visible. And the reason is this, is that on Judgment Day, we're not going to be judged according to concepts or ideas, but particular, specific, concrete, visible activity. And so, the reason we're highlighting this is that our understanding of the virtues is much, what we've been taught is much more abstract, much more conceptual, ideas, terms, definitions, right? Versus like particular activity, actions throughout the day. And I'll have to tell, I don't know what your experience is, but like when it comes to identifying a virtue in your life, or when I try to reflect upon what's a virtue I have to work on, or where it's weak, like it's really hard. It's elusive. It's like it's slippery in regards of like honing in on a particular activity or action or behavior. So if you turn to page 138, this is a line from St. Gregory of Nazianzen. It's D, page 138, you go down to D, this is just a citation reference. It is not at all an easy task to discover the one virtue that surpasses all others and to give it, that one, the scepter and palm. So that means it's a ruling one. And the palm is the one that palms are used to what you venerate and adore, right? So like this is what has the eye of your mind. It's not easy to discover that one virtue. Just as it's not easy in a meadow fragrant with many blossoms to find the most fragrant and beautiful. Hospitality is a fine thing. Among sinners was the harlot Rahab by choice, who for her hospitality won peace and salvation. So he gives an example of a particular virtue, a person who chose the one virtue that surpassed them all. And how once they did that, they were successful on all fronts. But the challenge here is like identifying, okay, he's talking here about identifying like the most important virtue that you should work on, and the difficulty of that, but it's also difficulty for some reason choosing a particular behavior to focus on is like, there's something in our soul that has a distaste for it. There's an aversion to it. Or if we hook on to something that we should work on, it's like, he would say like getting up on time when the alarm goes off. Okay, he would call that like, he would put that as a virtue. Well, that's something you can do. But we have an aversion to getting specific because I think it's because we don't like change. It requires conversion on our part. And so in order to identify a specific behavior or activity, which he would call a virtue, and because this is what this section is all about, choosing a virtue to work on, you got to really want it and dig. Does that make sense? Okay. So as we take a look here, then that's going to be our goal. If we can come out of here with a little bit of a lot more of a thinking framework about how to hunt how to hunt for a virtue and find it, and maybe have some indication of what that one is to work on, we're gonna go miles in the spiritual life. You remember we talked about, when he talks about prayer in here, he says that most people don't make much advancement in prayer because they go to their prayer and they say their prayers and they don't come away with a specific resolution. And it's like, I used to read that and think about that, it's like, and never do it, of course, but I was like, this is like eating broccoli. I mean, unless you're Father Matt David, and that's like candy for him, he loves it. It's not tasteful. We have an aversion to it. So it's just good to know that, because you know, like, if I'm not prepared and someone serves broccoli, the smell, the memories around it, the childhood trauma, I won't eat it. But if I prepare myself and I'm intentional about it and I have a plan, I'll take a bite and I'll drink some water, hold my nose, okay? I can do it. See what I'm saying? But I not if I don't have some kind of like intentionality around this. Okay, so that's going to be our goal: choosing a virtue. This and in the United States, in our world right now, it's basically you can choose and have it all. So, what are you going to do this Lent? 10 things. I think if St. Francis de Sales was your spiritual director, he'd say, you're a fool. Right? I'm saying this, but I do it all the time. And I fail all the time, like a dog returns to its vomit, as Proverbs says. That's how I go to my approach. And there's really a lack of humility there on my part. Like, what I'm able to do, what we're able to do. I was reading something on priority. This is a big thing, kind of leadership literature right now. You know, and organizing, you say defining a main priority. So, we're used to the word priorities. What are the top things? When I was reading an article, it wasn't until the turn of the 20th century that the word priority started to take on a connotation of plural, that you can have priorities. You know, it's funny, I'm teaching this. If you look at my journal right now, it's like, it says, choose your habit for the day. And this morning I wrote down 4 things. Do what I say, not what I do. But like, this helps me because the teaching, because I need this just as much as anyone else. So this is what he wants us to do, and it's not. And we're going to go through a little process here in these reflections of like, there's a discernment in regards to what activity are you going to choose. So it's not just choosing anything. Does that make sense? So that's where we're starting. It's like a priority habit, practice, a particular behavior that's done each and every day, ordinarily. Something visible, something specific. That's what we want to get after, okay? For him, and then, all right, so first of all, he sets it up that the choice that one must make in the practice of the virtue. So we have to make a choice. And then and basically in this first paragraph here on page 135, he's saying there's tons of virtues, and so it's kind of like a bee, and in the midst of that's a part of a beehive, a colony of bees. So I don't know if any of you raised bees. We did when I was kids. When I was young, well, I was always dumb when I was young and dumb. I remember, so I was with my uncle, and we had those white hives, and I just went up and kicked one of the hives, and a bee came right out and stung me on the face. So, well, anyway, so that's the first memory that comes to me. I lost that battle. But like, when you look at a colony of bees, that's a lot of bees, right? So one of the things he's using, why he's using this image, is like, there's a ton of virtues. What we've been shaped in is and it's really just kind of, 7 virtues. Faith, hope, and love, the supernatural virtues, justice, prudence, temperance, fortitude. You know, so that's kind of our schema, but that's not the way he's looking at it. He's saying it's a colony of bees. Take a look at colony of bees. It's like those are all your options there. But then he's saying there's a priority amongst the bees. The queen bee, right? And the queen bee, what directs and orders the whole life of the colony revolves around the queen bee, right? Okay, so he's wanting to get that. It's like when you think about the colony, you think about the queen bee, compare that to the volume of virtues and the necessity of recognizing that there's an order in regard, and a specific order to one bee who is the most important of all, that orders everything. And what does that be? Love, right? So he says, and let's quickly just define love. Love is about being something beneficial and good for one. It could be for yourself, it could be for another. So doing something, you do something good for another, that's love, right? So there's a uniting, and there's always a uniting that happens in love. So I'm united to the other, and there's a movement to do good for the other because of that union, and the appreciation that's associated with that union. So it's always connected with something good, and so that's going to give order to these thousands of bees, all these behaviors, because I can have a habit of something. Okay, getting up on time when the alarm goes off at 7 a.m., whatever, 6 a.m. Okay, so that's rough, and I'm going to be really committed. That would be a virtue for you. Okay, so that practice, that behavior. But he says that you have to remember, like, okay, love's got to order this. So, family, your mother is taking care of her child, and the child is not going to bed when she wants it to. So she says, well, the big most important virtue here is I have to get up at 7, so I'm not going to be able to tend to the baby. So she passes them off to her husband. They didn't have any agreement in regards to that in that moment, so she kind of does it because I've got to get up at 7. Well, there's something off there, right? It's got to be ordered by charity. You know, that means, like, maybe tomorrow I'm not getting up at 7. Does that make sense? So love's going to be the thing that orders. What's the good for the other person? What's the good for the group that we're all gathered here together? You can, and even you can think about this as far as prayer would be, you know, your daily prayer would be a virtue. But in this case, say, okay, so you're going to be praying 30 minutes a day, and someone calls, there's an emergency situation. It's like, well, I need to do my 30 minutes of prayer first. Well, it's an emergency. It's just, so like, yeah, that's a virtue, but it becomes distasteful when it's not ordered in the right way. And so, here's another example. So my grandma, like, okay, she could not, on my mom's side, so my grandma Siler, she was always clean. And like, when it was just her and grandpa, and nobody was there, she would still, like, every Saturday was her routine that she would wax the floor. I mean, like, every week, wax the floor. I don't know, my mom waxed the floor every year. She might have. Okay, so everything was pristine. So that was like cleanliness. That would be a virtue for St. Francis de Sales. And so it's a But sometimes what would happen, we'd come over to visit and she would just be cleaning. And then we tried to see what kind of trouble we could get into. But don't we kind of all do, here's another example, just yesterday, so I would, you know how they make distinctions of like, are you a task person or a people person? So like, those are both really important, right? So I'm task, so I get more energy and enthusiasm probably, like, make sure I complete all my emails today, right? Versus like, I should probably go and visit with this person some, and tend to this need that came up, but I won't be able to get my emails done. Well, completing my emails each day promptly and within 24 hours, that would be a virtue for him. So yesterday, which was a rare day for me, I actually chose some people opportunities over getting my emails done. And it was, let me just tell you, like, it took me like an hour interiorly to negotiate that. Because I didn't have any savor for it. But it was like, it was ordered by love. That was big growth for me. That was yesterday. I'm not, once a week is good. Does that make sense? Like, so he's saying yes, those are all good things, but don't lose perspective. Don't lose perspective. Okay? Yeah, but it becomes opprobrium, it becomes stinky when we choose a virtue without perspective, an activity without perspective. Can anybody think off the top of their head of like what that might look like, or what you've seen it, how you've seen it maybe in your own life or in someone else?
Yeah, my goal was to get my tax papers done, because I do all my own taxes, my business and otherwise, and that takes me a good long while. So I thought, I'm only teaching half-time this week, so now I can get my taxes done, you know. So, and then along comes Susie Q, who's an adult, she needs a lot of help.
Yeah.
She doesn't read or write English, she has a lot of problems, she lives alone. Actually, none of her children help her. So she kind of relies on me. So ring, ring, ring. My internet's not working, my telephone's not working, my TV's not working. No kidding, I bet I spent 10 hours. 10 hours. And so I was up doing my taxes at a time when usually this is my relaxed time.
So how would this be connected to where there was a virtuous action or behavior, an activity that you were doing, and you lost perspective in that regards?
Well, you want me to lose perspective?
Yeah. So no, so what would be an example? So like my example with the emails is like that would be a virtue of like promptly responding to the emails, but then doing it so excessively that I neglect higher goods, like other people's, attention and investment in them, or.
Well, I was supposed to tutor a child yesterday afternoon, but I was still at her house. But I got a message from the one I'm supposed to tutor that says, maybe I won't come. And so I said, okay, I'm not going home, because I'm not done here. And why should I go home because maybe they won't come?
I'm confused there.
So I said, should I have gone home, because that was my initial obligation, was to tutor that child, and
Yeah.
believe me, she needed it badly.
Yeah. So, I think where it would be, what St. Francis de Sales would say, like, okay, I'm strongly inclined, because I have this habit, it's like, it's kind of, if it's a habit, like a virtue, it's easy, joyful, prompt, it's like second nature, right? It's almost like I have to do it. In that situation, did a particular habit of like helping other people actually get in this situation, actually get in the way, because that's, helping other people is what you do, you know, in learning, right? So that's a particular virtue room, but then you have this other obligation, like to get your taxes done. So he would say, it's like, okay, if I really think about this, in this circumstance, does love require me to like say no? I know this sounds like crazy, right? Because it's like, this is helping another person, but like, it's not a matter of helping until, like, you have to say yes to everything. You know, he wouldn't say that. It's like, no, I've got this other care that's gonna be important. So I think that's how he would, I mean, those would be the things that he would ask in that regards.
Well, usually that's what I do. If I'm over there helping her and I have somebody to teach, I say, I'm sorry, you know, and it's hard to keep her on task.
Yeah.
She is all over the place all the time. So, and usually I say, I'm sorry, I have to go, I'm going, because I have to tutor somebody, and that's my first responsibility. But yesterday I was on the phone with Cox, and that's not an easy.
That's torture.
And they were telling me, do this, you know? So if I hung up the phone, I would have to start all over again.
It's true.
Okay, so now moving on, choosing a virtue, the different types of virtues according to frequency of use. So the title here is choosing a virtue, and then different considerations that we have to take into account when choosing the virtue. That's for us, the activity, right? The specific thing. All right, so he is going to say in here, the first line on page, I think this is super important, 135. It's the last paragraph here. Okay. Among the virtues, practice of the virtues. So he's helping us, he's coaching us. It's like to get to the specific thing that we need to commit to. And so he says what? We ought to prefer what is more conformed to our duty and not what is more conformed to our taste. What does that mean?
Duty would be equivalent to an obligation.
Mm-hmm. So he says that means you must choose the activity that you have the greatest distaste for, that you get the least pleasure out of. That, yes. Is that what he's saying?
No.
No.
What's he saying then?
Well, if I wanna watch a TV show and relax, instead of doing my dishes, you know, that I should choose the dishes.
Okay, and so and initially you would think of like, oh, watching TV, that's not a virtue at all. Well, no, he would say that would be compared to like a type of leisure that we need for our psyche and our life. But like maybe in this situation, it's like, okay, right now here, the duty is that, you know, I have to have a clean, my house needs to be kept up, right?
Well, I could be watching Bishop Barron on TV. I do that sometimes. I neglect my house to watch Bishop Barron or some other spiritual talk on TV.
Oh, well, just listening and especially in the example he gives of St. Paula, I think if our virtues in some regard are a way of controlling
Mm-hmm.
our lives, our situations, then that's probably a good sign to
Yeah,
back off.
yeah. I know what you're saying there, just like just for myself, just like organizing, planning, and scheduling my day, and then the day doesn't want to submit to my schedule, you know? So, it's important, I think, that we have a sense of like what are, what are our duties? Have you ever made a list of like, what's your duties? You see, if we don't do this, we don't really get to the point. He would say that this hardly fits into the word virtue for him because it's too conceptual. That's why he gives all these examples, right, of particulars. So, if you think about married life, okay, so what are some married life duties?
Preparing dinner, meals.
It might be preparing meals, right?
Mhm.
So these would be, in particular, your responsibilities regarding household chores, right? I know if you told some people, some young couples that it was a woman's job to do the cooking, it might not go so well. But that's the way my mom and dad roll, I'll tell you. What else?
Time for your spouse.
So what if you really like, it's like, you haven't had, I mean, as far as like, and see how difficult this gets, because there's not like, you can't just go with your, as far as duties with your spouse and say like, well, 2 hours each day, okay, let me time that, and then I'll set my alarm, right? You see how fluid this is, because right now my spouse might need a lot of my time, or like right now my spouse might not want any of my time, okay? And so this is, it's not a math problem. It has to be assessed according to what he said. What's he say in this beginning of this chapter? By love. And so the way you look at it is like, what's going to be the most helpful for the person at this time? And it's a prudential judgment. So it's like, so you don't want to get hung up on like minutes or anything, but like they need some more time today because of this. It can be so helpful because of our fallen human nature, our inclination is often is like, is how this is going to be helping me and whether it's pleasurable for me. So time for your spouse. With the date, so it is good being specific, but then we can be so specific that we become legalistic and right, and then I think a key word for St. Francis of Sales would be adaptation, adaptability. So it's like available. If I'm because that means I have a plan, but I can call it audible, right? Okay, so like, if I'm choosing duty according to pleasure, there's probably times that you would like, you have a good spiritual life and you would really just like to spend this time in prayer. Well, the most pleasurable thing at this moment would be the prayer. But this is not, but I would have to say that that should be more of an exception in the sense of like, and this is where you have to weigh it again. It's like, no, my spouse needs me so this is what I've committed to as far as daily prayer, but today, in this situation, my spouse is really struggling or there's a great need there. It is particular, but it takes discernment in the midst of that. Okay. When it comes to choosing the virtue, Let's see here. He talks about that some virtues are rarely used and some virtues are used all the time. So, let's see here. Okay, so this would be the second paragraph on page 135. Occasions do not often present themselves to practice bravery, magnanimity, or brilliance, but gentleness, temperance, honesty, and humility are some virtues that ought to tinge all the actions of our life. So it's like, I'm going to be patient to someone who really does me harm today. That's my resolution. Well, that doesn't happen that often, right? So when it comes to different types of virtues, just kind of think about, like, there are some that are used, like these behaviors that are used every day. There's some that, that are used rarely. So hone in on, focus on, cultivate a virtue that's used on a regular basis. It's going to be much more helpful to you. This is a great example here, the paragraph on the last paragraph on page 135 about St. Paula. Pauline was mentioning preference to practice the harshness of bodily mortification in order to more easily enjoy spiritual pleasure. So she loved practicing bodily mortification. She was drawn to it. It led her to be detached. It led her to kind of be indifferent and not be craving the things of the flesh. And so her heart was available and enjoying spiritual things, right? But she had a greater duty to obey her superiors. That is why St. Jerome admits that she was wrong. So another example, the apostles, on the other hand, had been commissioned to preach the gospel and distribute the heavenly bread to souls, and hence judged extremely well that they would be wrong to leave this holy mission to practice the virtue of caring for the poor. However excellent that virtue. So that can cause a conflict in one, can it? It's like, and the evil spirit can do that. It's like, if you've been given a particular charge, like God's wanting you to be committed to some practice that is helping other people, but you're not doing anything in this area. So the guilt that can be associated with that can be a stumbling block, you might say. And so the discretion that he's putting out here is like, no, it's okay. You don't have to have every virtue. And he connects it to a person's calling or vocation. So this is the duty, right? Every calling has a special need to practice some particular virtue. A soldier, a married person, others, those of a widow. While it would be good if everyone practiced all the virtues, nevertheless, all do not have to be practiced equally. So we can be at peace with that. All right. Now, what about virtues? So this was when we're choosing a virtue, the number one thing that we want to consider is our vocation and our calling. And our vocation and our calling goes through different stages, like this marriage. There's various stages of marriage and of married life, and so what the duty might be for the good, so the good of the other person as far as where you're at in the relationship might be a lot different this year than it was last year. So this really takes some time and reflection in regards to, like, your vocation, your calling at this time, but specifically right here and right now. What are your duties? Okay, now there's a virtue that we can choose that are not according to our duties. So it's okay. So it's like we're moving on. That we are to cultivate virtues that are not connected to something we have an obligation towards. So And so how do you choose between those? Well, he makes the distinction really between body and soul. And I think these, we could really connect this to Lent and the resolutions that like, what do we choose to do for Lent? And this could be that can be a great exercise in discerning what practice, because I think when he's using the word virtue, maybe practice would be better. What's the particular practice? So that's done with regularly, right? Frequently. So if you're choosing among the various options, which one would have priority? Body versus soul. Okay? And so on page 137, he's saying like a comet, one sees a comet in the sky, relative to the stars, it appears a lot larger, right, than the stars. So the mortifications of the body, or those that are connected to what you see, seem to be much greater to our eyes. What are you giving up for Lent? Giving up candy. But in reality, there's a perception distortion going on, because the stars are much further than the comet. And so then he uses that as a comparison. So page 137, that first full paragraph. The temporal rites are commonly preferred to the spiritual. The hair shirt, fasting, nakedness, the discipline, and mortification of the body are preferred. And they're a lot easier to measure too, right? How you're doing. And compared to sweetness, gentleness, modesty, and other mortifications of the heart, which nevertheless are far more excellent. Choose then, my child, the finest virtues of them, and not the most popular, the most excellent, and not the most obvious, the best and not the bravest. So, again, what's our goal today? We want to leave here with an intention to choose a particular virtue, this activity to be working on. All right, and the way we are considering, like, what am I going to choose? What do you choose? First of all, it's like the consideration of is that there is many different options, and when we're choosing an option, it really needs to be in the context of love. Okay. The second consideration that we need to make is that we do have to choose. We have to make a choice. The third consideration is that we need to first choose according to duty, right? And not to pleasure. Not to the exclusion of pleasure, what you gravitate towards, but you got connected to what I'm committed to in my life. The next thing is what? In choosing a particular virtue this time, I may be in a place where I'm not being led, or it's a good thing for me to choose a virtue that's not connected to my vocation. No problem, right? He gives some considerations in which we can frame up how we think about what to choose. And so the only thing he's saying is that what? Don't just focus on the body, things pertain to the body, because that's almost what everybody thinks about when it comes to a Lenten resolution. You see how true he was saying here? It's like, yeah, that's what everybody sees. But that's not bad. That's good. But there's actually ones that are better. So are we at least considering some of those? Gentleness or sweetness. And since he wants to be very particular, he would want your gentleness, my gentleness, or my meekness to a situation where I'm tending towards anger with a person, he would want it to have a name and a face. I'm gonna be more patient today. Well, tell me how that's gonna go. It's not specific enough. It doesn't focus the will enough. So give me some examples here. So, okay, let's presume you're gonna choose a particular practice to work on, to give it priority, to commit to, that's not connected to a duty. And in this case, you're gonna choose something spiritual, something connected to the soul versus the body. So he gives some examples, right? Gentleness, sweetness, meekness. Can you name give an example of what something it might be for you. I'm not saying we're not gonna commit to this, but something for you, and make it specific. This is hard. It's elusive.
Okay, this is something like, there's this person at work,
Mhm.
nobody likes her.
Mhm.
She's just she's hard to like.
Yeah.
And so I've gotten to the point, she chooses who she speaks to. I'm not one of those people. So we're in the same room together, we pass each other, we get coffee, and I'm at the point right now, I basically ignore her.
Mhm.
So would it be, okay, today I'm going to, when I'm in the coffee room, I'm gonna say hi to her, and, try to be more loving towards her?
Yeah, so exactly, that's exactly, and like, I love how you went into like, when you go to the coffee room, you see how specific Barbara's getting there? That's what we're, like, this rarely happens, my friends, and this is why very few of us make much progress. It takes years and years, what could be actually done, happen in more like weeks or some months. Because we never get this concrete, it never gets visible enough, so it's like, and so you've got a specific thing you can say, as far as like, I could say hi to her, okay, so that's something specific, you can look at the end of the day, did I do that, right? Another thing could be, there's like, and the next week it's like, she doesn't respond, so she kind of shuns me. I'm not gonna take it personal, and I'm gonna do it for Jesus. You see? And that actually, when we get that specific about something, it actually energizes us for the activity. It's like, okay, yeah. So yes, great. Anybody else?
I'd say one that I'm trying to work on, is prayer towards other people, other than just saying, I'm praying for Ukraine, or praying for another person. Actually really, other than throwing out 50 Our Fathers on the rosary or something, actually quiet time and actually think about their suffering more to heart than just saying, I pray for you, or you know how superficial that can be, and actually no prayer, just sit there quietly and really concentrate on that person's, how they're suffering.
Yeah.
Something deep to where it has meaning between myself and the Lord.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. So that's very specific, and then you could even take it to the, like, so, in the morning, for 5 minutes of the time that I spend in prayer, I'm gonna be considering the suffering that they're going through, as if it were my own suffering or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
I have a 6-year-old girl that I tutor, okay, and she is really, I've never encountered this. Everything she looks at, if she doesn't like it, she says, oh, that's ugly, that's poopy, I hate him. And she giggles all the time, and it really bends me out of shape, and I tell her every time, that is not nice. I mean, with her, I'm gonna take a different stance, okay?
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop telling her that, and I'm just gonna tell her things like, when you talk like that, then there's a lot of people that are going to think that you hate them just gonna try to reason more with her instead of getting upset with her. Cause getting upset with her does not help. She just keeps doing it.
Yeah, that's great. So that's something very, very specific. Is it specific enough at noon that you could, in 5 seconds, assess whether you've been successful or not?
Yeah.
Because if it takes like minutes, it's too vague, it's too general. Nope, yep, or no. That's not particular. Now, we don't want to I'm gonna hardly just bring this up. It can get to the point where it's legalistic, but don't worry about that at all right now. Like, that would have to be like, that's not our problem this day and age. And, you know, it's really, part of this is like these resolutions here of like, it's saying that our first movement is, which is on the kind of what we call the animal or the sensible level of the person, like our emotion, basically our emotional level, which is flight or fight, is, you know, the kind of the harsh response, which we don't have we don't have absolute control over. We have control, indirect control. So, which just means I can't stuff it, because that's not the way that the emotions work. But as St. Thomas Aquinas says, it's like with this part of our kind of what he calls it's not voluntary. So it's automatic. It's instinctual. He says it's like the control that a person like a king has over his subjects. So the subjects have their own mind, right? But he can direct and motivate. So, but what Barbara, like what you were saying, is like that's everybody doesn't like her at work, right? So that's the instinctual, right? And this person is not helpful, harmful. I don't like them. Like that's the bottom. That's the sense or body or emotional reaction. But and so, do I have absolute control over that? No. But as a king to its subjects, I can prepare and redirect. I can be intentional about like maybe saying like my initial movement towards this person is just to stay away. Okay, I'm not gonna. I can choose to resist that, and maybe one of the things that I'm gonna do is first thought wrong, because that's kind of where we're at when it comes to like, and so we can have some control. It's indirect, but not absolute control over the emotional part of us, the animal part of us, the body part of us. Okay, so we'll if you want to know your assignment, the goal would be to spend some time really considering a practice that you want to work on and committing to that. And the reason that we have all these reflections and considerations is that it shouldn't be arbitrary, right? There's a way of thinking about how to choose. And then you can kind of bring that to your prayer too. And I would recommend, I think he would say this too, is that choose something that you might have to commit to for a longer period of time. So it's like not choosing something for tomorrow, but like something like where you don't have a habit of, it's not easy, joyful and proud. That means it's going to take a lot of repetition. And then that actually is incorporated into your prayer life. Okay, so I didn't tell Kid. We were going to be next week, but my family decided to butcher hogs next weekend. So
They'll be bringing us all bacon and
so
chicken.
so the following week I'll be bringing bacon and pork chops. So, but we'll meet not next Saturday, but the following Saturday, and we'll just keep going through this chapter. Yeah. so I think we kind of got a sense of our assignment here. What can be really helpful is like he gives just tons of examples, like from the saints or different individuals in society, to help illuminate maybe areas, something that we can hone in on. And here's another thing to keep in mind. What you choose, don't think you need to choose a perfect thing. Something good, that's okay, because that can be elusive too. I don't know what the perfect. There's so many blossoms and flowers in the field, right? So, all right, we'll end. Immaculate Heart of Mary.
Pray for us now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Father.